A big hello from us here at BDA Training. It's always great when the departments link in this way. So it's lovely to join our colleagues in BDA events in this way. So thank you for inviting us to deliver this session, which we hope is going to be really informative actually. It's all about getting ready to start learning again in these extraordinary times, isn't it? And on the back of that, thinking about developing and, as it says here, inspiring some of those dyslexia superpowers. So, what we hope we share with you this evening is quite an inspirational session. As Claudia said, please do ask questions and let's get started. So, as Claudia says, my name's Donna and I'm part of the BDA training team. I've popped my email address on here. We will have a copy of the slides as well, everyone, if you'd like that to be sent to you, no problem whatsoever. So let's get started. Hopefully, there we go. Yeah, I was a bit worried then the tech was going to let me down, but it's fine. So we set the theme for tonight, and yes, it's been tough, hasn't it? Tough for us all. We are in, as it says here, very unprecedented and incredibly challenging times for us all. So I think when we are in these kind of extraordinary times, we have to realize the impact that's going to have on teaching and learning as we start to get back to what we've heard a lot about, the new normal. And it's for all the things and the reasons, I kind of don't need to say it, but it's just setting the scene for this evening. It's in terms of for our children, it's all those lost teaching and learning hours, isn't it? Despite our best efforts to homeschool, it's not the same as being in school. We know that our learners are kind of struggling and lost out. So our education system is desperately trying to catch up with itself. That also occurs behind a backdrop really of the emotional impact that our children and young adults and young learners, our teenagers, are going through at the moment. It can be just the anxiety and fear, which is bad enough. For some of our children and families, they will have gone through terrible loss and bereavements, which again is absolutely awful. And then on top of that, so all these kind of really uncertain situations, this change in routine, these disruptions as well, and families under pressure as well. So it's the pressure of the emotional fallout of COVID, but also financially as well, because of the things that a lot of us have been living with in terms of job uncertainty and so on. So these are not great times. And it's really important, isn't it, that first of all, we acknowledge that in terms of what we go into now for our children as learners is going to be unprecedented and incredibly challenging. And it was on the back of kind of me thinking about some of those issues that I thought, okay, what do we want to share this evening? Because we don't want it to be doom and gloom, do we? It's important that we offer a message of hope. So we have the issue of COVID. We've also got issues that transcends the current issues that we're going through with COVID in terms of dyslexia itself as well. And what we share as well this evening is some research that BDA did as part of the APPG. So that's all party parliamentary group that BDA is the secretariat of. So some research that we did in 2019. So this was pre-COVID. And so it'd be fascinating to know post-COVID how some of these statistics play out really. And again, it doesn't make great reading, does it? It told us, the study at the time, all about this human cost of dyslexia, that about 58% of parents report that their children try to avoid talking about their dyslexia. Okay, 80% of parents reported that their children try to hide their difficulties related to dyslexia. And then 85% of parents report their children felt embarrassed about their dyslexia. So I suspect you probably agree with me. That is not a great story around dyslexia, is it? To me, that suggests shame and embarrassment and fear. And again, these are all issues that we need to figure out what we do as parents and educators in terms of overcoming that. If you want to find out more about this particular study, you can find it on the BDA website, by the way. It is a fascinating read. And as I say, a very sobering read, because that now combined with what we're going through with COVID makes for a very daunting and difficult picture as we try and motivate our children to get back into learning. So what do we do about it? And that's why I desperately wanted this evening to be about inspiring superpowers, about preparing for learning and keeping it really, really positive actually, because as parents, I think, and also educators, and all the many ways that we engage with children, it really is our job, isn't it, to make sure that we keep our children really positive and engaged in these very difficult times. I think as well at this point in our time together during this session, it's kind of useful to think about the statistics. I mean, maybe some of this is news to some of you that you didn't realize that dyslexia is actually the highest incidence disability, with around 10 to 15% of the population experiencing it. When we crunch those numbers down, that's about 6.3 million people here in the UK who experience dyslexia. And again, if we play around with those statistics, it tells us that's about, in a class of 30, about 3 of our children in those classes will experience dyslexia. So again, this is another really important reason why we have to figure out what we do to support our children with dyslexia, because the numbers tell us there are lots of children out there, and adults, of course, who experience dyslexia. So that's kind of setting the scene. So when my colleagues in the events team said to me, would you come and do a session? And I thought, what shall we do this session about? We've got lots of information on the BDA website about how you can support literacy and numeracy and dyscalculia and other learning differences, for example. BDA training offer a lot of those courses. I know that the events team have taken a lot of you on a journey of fantastic free webinars funded by JJ, who talk about literacy and all these fantastic top tips with learning. So I thought, what could we share with you this evening based on some of those things that we've just talked about with COVID, with some of the issues around dyslexia and our young people feeling incredibly embarrassed and shameful around it? What could we talk about this evening, really? And so I got inspired, because what I wanted to do, as I said, is to keep it positive. So I thought, okay, what can we share from the BDA side? So as it says here, BDA is 50 years old next year. So we've been around for a long time. And through those decades, we've heard so many voices of the experts, of people with dyslexia themselves, of children. And so that's something that is a rich heritage for us here at BDA as well. As I've said, I'm part of BDA training team, very proud to be part of that team, because every year we train thousands of teachers, of parents, people in the workplace, you name it, we normally have provided training. And so again, what that gives us is a real overview of kind of words of wisdom that all those professionals, all those educators, all those parents have shared with us as well. And then on a personal level, I've been in the BDA, this will be my 16th year at BDA as well. And I've been in the very privileged position to hear a lot of those words of wisdom and all those conversations. And so I think it probably puts us in a pretty good position to share what we plan to tonight about, okay, how do we start to prepare for learning again after all these difficult times? And also, how can we inspire to get the best out of our dyslexic children? And we talk a lot now, don't we, about superpowers. So how can we inspire those superpowers? So I hope what we're going to share is going to be really useful for you all. Again, something that kind of inspired me for this session, and it's not really to do with dyslexia as such, but it's actually one of my favourite books, and it's What I Know for Sure by Oprah Winfrey. And actually in this book, what she talks about is kind of all her kind of experiences and all her ideas of all the things she's learnt so far. And this book, one of my favourites, inspired me to think, okay, well, what can we think about? What's the BDA's words of wisdom, really? What do we know for sure? So I was kind of inspired by that as well, one of my favourite books. So these are types of information that we get told a lot at BDA. And as I say, I'm often in a very privileged position where I hear these voices. And this is an adult voice. And I always love this type of question. Maybe you guys do too. And please do share your thoughts in the chat box. And it's the question of what you would tell your younger self. And this is from Christine, who wasn't shy in saying that she was 58 years young. And she talks about going back to talk to her 14-year-old self. Of course, she had dyslexia, and she would say, believe in yourself, don't give up. All those people who think you will fail are wrong. Believe what mum is saying, and I love that bit. You can be whatever you want to be as long as you don't quit and keep the faith. So again, I think it's important that when we hear from adults like Christine, who's actually a very successful professional, talking in that way, it gives us great insight, doesn't it, as parents, on how we can support our children in that way. And it's got to be, I think, a message of hope. I love the idea of keep the faith, don't quit. And I guess, really, in a nutshell, that's what tonight's about, really. Because we talk a lot at BDA nowadays around an idea of positive dyslexia. And actually, what we share now is not an exhaustive list. So, if your children are talking about other superpowers that they may have that they attribute to their dyslexia, please believe them. What we share here is a combination, rarely, of things that we know from research and also anecdotal evidence that children and adults talk about in terms of their superpowers connected with dyslexia. And as I say, you'll hear me use that phrase a lot this evening, superpowers. It's a really exciting phrase. And I think it's an incredibly positive one. As we talk about positive dyslexia, we didn't used to think about dyslexia in these ways. So we start by talking about determination. We know that young people and adults with dyslexia are often super determined, and this can be for a variety of reasons. It can be because a case of kind of having to be, and we hear a lot of children and adults talk about dyslexia in terms of determination because they have to always go above and beyond. But some will just say, I don't know why I'm always so determined. I always give 1,000,000%. That's just the way I am. It's one of my superpowers. And again, a great trait, I hope you agree, considering the difficult times that we're in and the kind of new adventures that lie ahead in this new normal that we're hearing a lot about at the moment. So we start with determination. And then we move on to talk about atypical problem solving. And that's kind of talks about thinking outside the box, doesn't it? It's somebody, either young or old, who is able to make these brilliant and unusual connections in their brain because of these ways that their dyslexia enables them to use their brains in different ways and think differently. So, again, when we're thinking about getting back into learning, that's a great trait to have, isn't it? To be able to think in a different way and solve lots of problems and come up with lots of fantastic ideas that nobody else is able to come up with. And I often associate atypical problem solving with creativity, actually, because I think we often think about creativity just being connected to the arts, don't we? Somebody being very artistic in those many different ways. But actually, you can be really creative in science and technology and maths and so on. So, creativity is just a fantastic gift to have across the board, I think, as well. This next one, and we'll dig a little bit deeper into that this evening, is good procrastination. So, somebody who is really good at thinking about things, needing some time to think. And I love this next word, incubating the best ideas. So, this is very much linked to atypical problem solving, but this is an idea of give me some time. And I can go away and do this thing called good procrastination and come back with lots of great ideas as well. So, again, this gives us ideas about how we can get the best out of our children now as we get them back into learning. It's giving them time to do some of these things, to be creative, and to have this thing called good procrastination. The next one's interesting as well. It talks about being exceptional in the right niche. And it's about finding that niche where our children are good at things, where they can excel. Now, hopefully, they will be in some of our curriculum areas. And we tend to find it's kind of a mixture. So it can be something, a child who's very good at maths, for example, and that's their superpower, and then really good at cooking at home or whatever it might be. So, again, I think as parents, it's making sure that our children have lots of different experience of different areas to shine, really, so that they find that right niche, whatever that might be for them. And we hear so much from adults with dyslexia that it was finding those niches in childhood, and it normally is facilitated by parents or grandparents or loved ones in order to help them find, whether it's something to do with gardening or looking after pets, or something that they might be doing some little DIY jobs, or whatever it might be, cooking and so on. Having chances to do some of those things at home, when we speak to our adults, they will say it was through childhood, having had chance to do those things, that they were able to find that right niche, which helped them to end up on that fantastic journey into their professional lives as well. We often hear that those with dyslexia, children and adults, are great with people as well. So this is often a superpower too. And it talks here, doesn't it, about being confident, having great social skills, but also great kind of people skills in terms of empathy and caring skills. Really important at the moment, isn't it? Something to be really proud of if you do have those types of skills as well. Often greatly underestimated, I think, in our society. But we have a quote tonight in our session which really emphasizes from a young person talking about those types of superpowers, which is, I'm so glad people are thinking about those in terms of traits and characteristics to be proud of. And then what we hope for is an effective use of coping strategies. And again, I think as parents, it's our role, isn't it, to enable our children to figure out what's going to work for them. What are those coping strategies? Yes, school and our educators have a really important role in that. Of course they do. But certainly at home, we do too, to help our children to figure out what works for them. And I hope this evening session maybe will inspire some of those ideas as well. So, what does this all mean for us? I think, therefore, if we are serious about making learning impactful, regardless of the curriculum subject that our children are going to work on, regardless of the age of our children, whether they are young children in Key Stage 1 or we're talking about teenagers, it doesn't matter. The gift transcends age in that way. And so we have to make sure that we really accentuate those gifts that we've just had a look at, those positive dyslexia traits, if we're going to support our children to navigate through uncertain times ahead in terms of their education. So, what is the wish list, as I've called it on this slide? What are we talking about? So, I think it's important, and you'll hear this word a lot, is it to encourage what we call metacognition. And it's a very grand word, isn't it? But it basically means thinking about thinking, being a reflective learner, thinking about what's going to work for me, what does work for me, how do I learn, what's the best way to learn. Now, ideally, we want school to teach that to our children. And often it is an intrinsic part of how teachers will teach, is creating reflective learners. And that reflection is self reflection, really, thinking about what works for me. However, we've just said right at the beginning, haven't we? There's been all this lost time in school. And so, in terms of ideas like metacognition, yes, we know our teachers know how important that is, but we know also they've got a mountain to climb in terms of the curriculum and all those lost teaching time as well. So, actually, I believe that we can have a role at home to try and encourage our children to start to think about, okay, what works for me? What doesn't work for me? Why don't I like something? Can I figure out why I don't like it? Is there a pattern there? When I do like something, why do I like it? Why does it work? And it's encouraging our children to talk about how they think and giving them chances to have that talk with us or with siblings that really will help these metacognitive skills. Okay, because what we tend to find again, and in BDA training, we work with a lot of very successful adults in workplace settings. When we dig a bit deeper about what's worked for them, a lot of them will talk about this awareness of what works for them. And as I say, the word kind of metacognition really sums that up. But it's kind of being your own best expert, and that's one of the bullet points I've popped on this slide as well. Okay, so we know metacognition's got to be on our wish list as we're preparing our children to learn and become successful learners and go on to reach their potential. We also need, wherever possible, to encourage this thing I've mentioned, positive procrastination. Okay. And I think in our society, we often associate procrastination with a very negative thing, don't we? I think if you call somebody a procrastinator, it's normally not a compliment. And I always remember I went to one of my children's parent-teacher meetings, and she'd said about one of my daughters, oh, she's a real procrastinator. And the teacher did not mean that in a compliment. I know she didn't at the time. And I actually said, well, actually, that can be a good thing. And I remember the teachers thinking, hang on a minute, I need to write that down, because I was kind of giving the teacher food for thought, because I was talking about positive procrastination. And actually, every adult we often talk about who has dyslexia themselves, when we start to talk about positive procrastination, they get it. They know what we're talking about and they love the idea. And they're very grateful to the BDA that we've kind of coined the phrase, because actually it really rings true for them. And for those of you who are parents of dyslexic kids, it maybe this rings true for you as well, because it really alludes to the fact that we need to give our kids thinking time and do whatever it is that might look to us like daydreaming or in quotes wasting time, but actually there's a lot of great thinking that's going on behind the scenes. And we'll dig a bit deeper into that in a moment. But yeah, it's an interesting one. And actually, when we talk a lot about positive procrastination in the workplace, we have a lot of very nervous bosses who say, oh, we haven't got time for all that. And we get it. Yes, maybe we don't have a great deal of time to do positive procrastination in work. But at home, we kind of do, don't we, with our kids? And this is the bits where I think as parents, we can really make a difference here and set the seeds for our kids' future success. So we know that part of that success, part of that wish list is this positive procrastination. Okay, and we'll dig a bit deeper in a moment. Creativity, we mentioned that already. We know that this is a great superpower for our kids and adults with dyslexia. But as I said, not everybody who's going to have dyslexia is going to be a great artist or actor or dancer. But creativity is broader than that. And it's about almost liberating that phrase and making it for those of us who aren't necessarily musical or artistic, but actually feel super creative about the way we dress or the way we express ourselves. That can also be creative. So again, it's about encouraging our children to use their creative gifts, to think about how they learn, how they're going to do their positive procrastination. Actually, the ability to be creative runs through everything we do, really, if we're serious about getting successful. And I think I've already mentioned this next one too when I talked about metacognition, because it's very much linked, I think. And it's become your own best expert. Again, when we speak to successful adults and we say, what's been some secrets for your success? They often say, I really know myself. I know what I'm really good at, and I know the bits that I need support. And again, when we dig deeper into that journey and say, okay, how did you get there? How did you find out that stuff about yourself? It's very rare that they won't talk about childhood. Most of our adults go back and talk about their family setup, what they did as kids. And so, again, it tells us, doesn't it, as parents, that actually what we do now with our kids is really important. So, beyond trying to do homework and curriculum subjects, it's these things that we really need to try and encourage them to do. And becoming your own best expert is that journey of self awareness, being honest with yourself. I think that's why it was so painful to read some of the statistics at the beginning from the APPG, when we hear that the majority of kids don't want to talk about their dyslexia. They are shy about it and embarrassed, even with parents. So we've really got to be great role models, I think, and be really positive about dyslexia in order to encourage our children to talk to us in this way, because it's through talking to us and reflecting on these things and this metacognition, understanding what works, then they can become their own best expert. That's something we always aspire to at BDA. We really want our children and adults with dyslexia to really take ownership of their dyslexia. And a key part of that is becoming your own expert as well. And definitely, as parents and grandparents and so on, we can have a key role to play in that as well. Okay, and this next one I feel so passionately about, and happily the work we do at BDA really ties in with this. It's a kind of a new idea, but it's one that probably, if we think about it, has been around for a long while. We just haven't been so good at verbalizing it as we are now. And it's you can't be what you can't see. And it talks about the importance of role models. We need to share our stories for those of us who are adults with dyslexia, whether we are professionals, parents, whatever it might be, including celebrities and ambassadors. And we have lots of ambassadors at BDA, because it's really, really important to break down stigma and inspire others. And as I say, I love that phrase. you cannot be what you cannot see. So we really need to share with our children whoever their favorite role models is. And happily, if you Google famous people with dyslexia, the list goes on and on and on. So again, it's really important that we show them, look, there is a path ahead. Somebody has already achieved those things. Okay. And then we come down to some things that, again, I think is tied with metacognition. It's organizational skills. So we hear this so much from parents about, my kids are super disorganized at home, or they struggle to tidy their room and they forget their homework, and so on and so forth. We really need to explicitly teach our children how to do those skills. Again, what we tend to find with those with dyslexia, young and old, organizational skills, remembering things, so memory is on here as well. Yes, they can be challenging areas, but nothing that can't be overcome. And so, as parents, again, as family members, we can really support them in terms of what's going to work, experiment. We're not always going to have time in school to check out in a very kind of individual level what's going to work for learners. We do have hopefully some of that time at home, isn't it? And so that home is really the place, I guess, where we can figure out what's going to work. Is it going to be a kind of to-do list that you put on the fridge with some little images in? No, that's not going to work. Okay, maybe it's an app on a phone or whatever it might be. It's figuring out what's going to work for you in terms of remembering and keeping yourself organized as well. So I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper now into some of that wish list for the next few slides, if that's okay. And we start with the one that, as I said, I feel really passionate about in terms of you can't be what you can't see. Because I think those statistics from the APPG talking about almost shame and embarrassment, I think inspiring our young people, children and teenagers, to talk about dyslexia and to feel that, hey, this is nothing to be embarrassed about, really goes a long way to break down some of those barriers, really. Because I think if we are not careful, and as a parent myself, I know I fell into this trap, is worrying about all the challenges and the barriers, and as it says here in quotes, the problems associated with dyslexia, and kind of forgetting to celebrate all those gifts and talents and to really share some inspirational figures, of people that really, will mean a great deal for your kids. And as I say, happily, there are so many people now who are very open and talking about their dyslexia in that way. So in that way, it's relatively easy to find some inspirational figures. Certainly from the BDA side, we have so many ambassadors who are very successful. I'm sure some of these faces you will recognise in many different walks of life. And again, it's very much with that sentiment at its heart, really. It's about inspiring our kids to think, yeah, there's a road here. I can be my best self. I can achieve my full potential. There is no stigma around having dyslexia. And so, beyond BDA ambassadors, and obviously a lot of these very famous faces, very successful people, we are broadening it out into normal everyday folks who have been super successful in their line of work as well, who are happy to become ambassadors too. So that's something, again, as I said, not only me as a person feels very passionate about, because I know the difference it can make. BDA as a charity also feel incredibly passionate about inspiring others, and definitely ambassadors and famous faces who are talking about their dyslexia really, really help to be those role models. Okay. And this is a quote, and through our time together during this session, I've put lots of different voices in this quote in this session, because it's really important that beyond somebody like me talking, we have these authentic voices, isn't it? And I'd really like this quote from Sophia, who's 17. She says, "It was so inspirational when our head teacher talked about her dyslexia. I felt like she understood who I was, and it gave me inspiration." You can't say clearer than that, really, can you? And as I say, that's why it's really important. So we've got somebody slightly older than Sophia. So this is Steve, who's 40, and he talks about what worked for him. And I think actually, again, it ties in with having positive role models and being really supported. And he says, "I was very lucky. My family were my biggest supporters. School life was awful for me. I failed at everything, but I was loved at home. And my mum, dad, and nan really believed in me, and that got me through a lot of tough times. I see that struggle in my kids now, who both have dyslexia. I am determined to love them to bits and be their biggest cheerleader." So again, It ties in with what we're talking about. And I know you guys will be doing this as a matter of course, really. It's part of being a parent. And it's lovely to hear Steve talk about his nan. Grandparent power can never be underestimated. But I think it's important that we give ourselves credit for that. As parents, we've also been through incredibly difficult times at the moment. I saw somebody the other day in a fantastic T-shirt which said, "I've survived school teaching," and I thought, fantastic. It summed it up. They'd liked it so much they'd gone out and got a T-shirt with it on. And yes, we have survived through these difficult times, and we go on now. And this is what parents do or grandparents do, isn't it? We need to inspire our kids ready for learning again. And I think a session like this just gives us a moment to start to think, okay, it's good to hear people like Sophia, who's 17, talking about an inspirational head teacher, and Steve talking about a key role of how his family played. As he said, school was awful for him, but he got through it because of his family as well. So also I've mentioned this evening about creativity as well. And as I've said a number of times now, it's not just about the arts. Yes, we will know that some of our kids will be lucky enough to be fantastic musicians and artists and so on. We have so many individuals with dyslexia who are super, super creative. And again, that list is endless. If you've got creative kids in your life, finding out that, lots of musicians and so on have dyslexia is really inspirational, isn't it? But for those of us who aren't that creative in that way, as it says here, it's acknowledging that creativity is a superpower, but it goes beyond being great at the arts. And I love this. It's about how you dress, how you present yourself, science, technology. And I love this quote, creativity is actually a state of mind. So again, as we prepare our children for learning, it's tapping into that creativity beyond the arts. It's actually thinking outside the box. That's all part of creativity, really. And that great quote there from very famous dyslexic Albert Einstein, creativity is contagious, pass it on. We need to inspire that. I think in some ways that's going to be one of the key parts that's going to get us through this oncoming term and the autumn term as well. And again, a fantastic quote. This is from Jake. And just to let you know, these very famous kind of images here from Andy Warhol through to Leonardo da Vinci, through to Rodin the thinker and Pablo Picasso, all those artists had dyslexia. And he says that it's because I have dyslexia, I think I'm great at art. I used to think, despite of my dyslexia, I'm really good at art. But now Jake switched that on its head, and he thinks it's because he had dyslexia, he's great at art. And so, as he says, it's so exciting to think differently now. Dyslexia has given me superpowers. And we are more likely to hear our young people talk in that way now, which is incredibly exciting. So that does bring us on to the idea of superpowers. And again, a great quote from Scout. I love the idea of neurodiversity. So we hear that a lot now. And dyslexia is definitely part of that neurodiverse family alongside autism and ADHD and dyspraxia and dyscalculia. As Scout says, it's like the Avengers, which is fantastic, isn't it, to think about it in terms of a superpower. The Hulk and Spider-Man have dyslexia. Now we know Tom Holland, who plays the Hulk, and Mark Ruffalo, sorry, let's get it the other way around. Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man, and Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Hulk, have dyslexia and are very open about it. So I think when we hear someone like Scout talking about that in that way, which I'm guessing that's what they've been inspired by, is exciting, and it shows how when somebody like Tom, who plays Spider-Man, and Mark Ruffalo speak about their dyslexia, it really makes a difference for our kids as well. And again, we have to capture some of that energy, don't we? So let's have a look at what some of these superpowers might be. So this is Oscar, and he says, my mates call me the calculator. I'm that good at doing maths in my head. Hate reading, hate writing, and I can't spell, but I can do maths. I'm glad my school helps me with the stuff I struggle with and lets me really show off with some of the stuff I am amazing at. Next one, this is Maria, who's 72. Mr. Lomax, my music teacher, changed my life. I was pretty bad at everything except music. I remember the joy I used to get when I sang. I sing for pleasure now. It's always been a part of my life. Even my years working in an office, I would always be part of a choir somewhere. Now I've retired, it still brings me joy. I think music saved me in many ways. So lovely to hear from an older individual. So now we've got Jen, who's 13. talking about music again, but maybe in a different style. She says, I'm actually great at rap and poetry. I love it. Recording my thoughts instead of writing everything down is super helpful for me. My hand can't keep up with my brain. My school have a no pens day every term. A super cool idea. Again. So again, it's great when we hear somebody like Jen or Maria or Jake talking about superpowers or Scout, because actually it shows that there's a cultural shift actually about how we see dyslexia. Really important to capture that, I think, with us as parents, if we're serious about getting our kids getting back into learning and getting engaged again and feeling good about themselves. Sadie's talking about cooking. She says that she loves to cook. She wants to be a chef. She thinks that her dyslexias give her a sixth sense about food, which is brilliant, and what tastes good. It's hard to explain, but she feels like it definitely makes her good with food, and she wants to be the next Jamie Oliver. So again, Jamie Oliver talks very openly about his dyslexia too. And then we've got Imran, who's 12. I struggle with my schoolwork, but I'm a great friend. And I think my superpower is being a caring person. I'm a good listener and I would like to be a counsellor when I grow up. I really want to help people. So I think that's really great to hear somebody like Imran talk about beyond curriculum subjects or the arts. It's actually how they see themselves as an individual and talking about a good friend. Really important traits, actually, isn't it? Okay, so that's superpowers. And then we move on to positive procrastination, which I've mentioned a couple of times tonight. And it'd be great actually if you'd wish to share your thoughts in the chat box. If you can think of any examples of either for you or the children in your life of when examples of how they do their positive procrastination, if that's ringing any bells for you. So while you're having a think of that about that, what do we mean by this thing called positive procrastination? So it's kind of just thinking time, but it's kind of constructive thinking time. And as it says there, and I love this idea, it's busy doing nothing time. I remember speaking to an adult a couple of weeks ago who had dyslexia, and she said, actually, this really rings true for me. My positive procrastination time is when I'm hanging out the washing. She said, that's always when I'm mulling things over, and that's when I get my best ideas. And I thought, well, a brilliant time to do it, really. So it's that type of time, really, when you might be doing something else, but you're kind of thinking as well. And I think as parents, we need to allow those moments of sheer brilliance to occur when this positive procrastination might happen. And as I said, in school, we hope that this might happen, but because school is so busy and jam-packed with lots going on, it can be tricky for our teachers to organise this, isn't it? There's lots going on in a busy school day. And yes, family life is also busy, but maybe we've got more of a chance to allow this to happen at home. What do you think? So I'm not sure if anybody's put anything in the chat box. Claudia, if you're listening and you don't
I
mind
am,
having a look, is there
yeah.
anything we've had?
So we've got a couple. So
Fantastic.
Sarah has said, no, sorry, Lena has said, I do that while cleaning the house.
Ah, yeah.
Positive procrastination on the walk to school and just before
Yes,
bedtime.
great, good.
I'm a 49-year-old dyslexic and doing a EDD. If I get stuck or frustrated, I paint.
Brilliant. And thank you, 49-year-old dyslexic. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that because it shows that it's right for our grown-ups, isn't it? And I suppose maybe when you think back to when you were a child, maybe you were doing it then. We just didn't have a name for it then. Maybe it was called daydreaming then. I don't know. But do stop me, Claudia, if you get any good ones through. Somebody
Or
said to me, when do you do it, Donna? And I said, it's when I'm looking at the Emma Bridgewater catalogue and I'm sitting with a cup of tea. I go in my happy place and that's my time for positive procrastination then. So yes, it means a lot of different things to a lot of us. So it's food for thought, definitely, isn't it? But I think Sunil catches it in a nutshell for us. He's 15 and he says, I often get accused of not listening or daydreaming. I'm actually in my own little world, thinking about stuff and making sense of it all. That's why it's great to have brain breaks. So we do hear this a lot in school. And maybe, that's time to do positive procrastination because as Sunil says, it really helps him think. And again, yes, we know school is super busy. So maybe in family time, we can have some time for positive procrastination in all the ways that you guys have just shared as well. Okay, so on the back of that, what can we do to help? So I've kind of, I hope, inspired you to think, okay, these are the kind of things that we need to be getting our kids motivated around. These are the things that we need to kind of really stimulate them, really. We know school is going to be really busy this term, focusing on a lot of curriculum subjects, a lot of catch up. So some of the things that we've talked about on that wish list, it's probably going to be doing a lot at home, I suspect. Okay, so on the back of that, I thought, okay, bearing in mind what I'm thinking and all the things that we get tailored in BDA training, what would be my top 5? And this is my personal top 5, folks, based on some of the things that I've said. If you want to share some of your thoughts, please do. But I hope it kind of rings true for what I've kind of shared with you during this session. So, and it's in no particular order, okay? But number one, I think we need to think about getting our kids creative. But as I said to you a number of times tonight, it's not just about the art. So I know we've got a lovely picture there, felt tip pens and so on, but it's actually creative about just taking the ceiling off our thoughts and thinking about, okay, I've got maths homework. How can I be creative about it? You know, I always remember one of my friends whose sons absolutely hated maths. He had dyscalculia. He loved football. And so she'd take him out for a kickabout and practice his timetables in that way. And bless him, he'd be learning without kind of knowing he was learning and doing it in a fun way rather than sitting down, you know, trying to kind of learn them by rote. So it's that is actually really creative. It's a creative way to think about learning. And that's kind of what we need to get in touch with for us as parents, tapping in some to our creativity, but also our kids. Because if our kids have got dyslexia, then they're actually potentially going to have that real creative superpower. And so we need to tap into that and figure out what's going to work for them. Okay. On the back of that, then, I think number 2 is talking about keeping some sort of journal or log. And again, it doesn't have to be something very fancy. I know we've got a picture there of a beautifully turned out book with lots of images and so on. But in some way, we've got to encourage our children to keep a log or a journey, even if we're kind of doing it for them at first, of kind of what they're learning, because we know that what some of our kids will struggle with is making links and remembering information and organizational skills. So until we get them to a place where they can do that themselves, we as parents or grandparents or whoever we engage with our kids, we need to really do that for them. Because when we speak to adults and kids with dyslexia, one of the things they often tell us is, please don't presume I understand. Please don't presume that just because it's very clear to you, I'm going to automatically know what you're sharing with me. And certainly, again, with organizational skills and memory, we often just presume, oh, well, you know, because we've told our kids to do this, this, and this, they're going to remember it and be able to do it. No, we need to figure out different ways that we can support with that. Either when it's about remembering to do your homework and packing your bag for the next day and so on, or it's through to actually more intellectual side in terms of remembering information that you've just learnt from one maths lesson, ready to go to the next one as well. Okay. Number 3 is about positive thinking. We know that a lot of our kids now, and it's partly COVID, it's partly having dyslexia. And again, we don't know yet the kind of effect of COVID and dyslexia on our children at the moment. That research has not caught up with itself yet. As I said, we are going into unprecedented times. But we do know pre-COVID that self-esteem is often a huge issue with our adults and kids with dyslexia. So it's not just our kids, it's our adults as well. And so it's really important, isn't it, as parents, that we are, as Steve said earlier on, our kids' best cheerleader, even if it's not necessarily over academic subjects. It can be something about cooking a great dinner or whatever it might be, really celebrating all those achievements in many different ways. And we've got that 1:3 ratio. And what that tells us is that when we have one negative thought, or our child might say a negative thing about themselves, or inadvertently we might catch ourselves saying something that sounds pretty negative to our children, we need to address it by saying 3 positive or thinking 3 positive thoughts. And actually, that 1:3 ratio really helps, if you like, to cancel out the bad thought or the bad kind of idea that somebody's expressing. And again, in childhood, these are the times that we can start to get in those really good habits about mental health and about positive thinking as well. Number 4. Is thinking about thinking. So that comes back to metacognition and about figuring out how we're going to get our kids to be their own best expert, really thinking about what works for you. How do you learn best? Sometimes, ironically, it's by talking to our kids when they say they hate something, hate a lesson, and digging deeper. Why don't you like it? Often, when they talk about why they don't like it, so they'll often say, I don't understand. And then it's digging deep. Okay, why don't you understand? And then maybe they give us clues. And sometimes from that, we can extrapolate actually, okay, you don't like this because you're being taught it in that way or whatever it is. And so that helps them to figure out who they are as well. And then finally, and we hear this a lot around dyslexia, and I know Dr. Susie Nyman has done some fantastic free webinars that you'll find on BDA website in the series of these ones that are my events colleagues have been running. Very, very informative sessions around multisensory teaching, because actually we really need to get active around learning for our kids as well. Now, again, we know school are fantastic. They really try their best with this, but at home we've got endless, things in the kitchen we can use, lots and lots of felt tip pens or whatever it might be, to getting the Play-Doh out, whatever it might be at home as well, isn't it? And so we can often get way more active at home and be really, really multisensory with our kids in some ways that maybe school aren't always able to do. And as I say, if you want to find out more about multisensory, have a look at Dr. Susie Nyman's webinars. I know she did one about multisensory on a shoestring, which was fantastic as well. So I've just got one eye on the time, and as I say, you're going to get these slides. So what follows now is just a recap really of the things that we've been talking about when we need to get our kids getting ready for learning and getting the best out of them as well. It all talks about celebrating those gifts and talents, encouraging them to be creative, making sure that it's multisensory, having an investigative approach to learning. So again, we know that school will have a go at this. And what we mean by it is kind of having a question almost at the heart of our learning journey. I think at home we might have a bit more time to do that actually, and to figure out things. So I'll give you an example, a very quick example. So rather than saying what is 10 add 10, for example, expecting the answer 20, we'd say the answer is 20. Tell me some questions. And that's a different way to kind of stimulate learning, I guess. And in some ways, investigative learning and kind of changing up how you learn is very dyslexia friendly. It often appeals to our children with dyslexia because they think, this sounds really interesting now. And so we'll dig a bit deeper. Okay. Wherever possible, it's working together. So it talks about groups here. So yes, if you've got a number of kids, fantastic. It's getting them to work together in that way. If not, and it's just you and your child, you can still do it as well. And it's about making learning hands-on and working together and doing some of the investigative learning adventures together as well. And then it talks about brain breaks and thinking time. So that's all about kind of positive procrastination, isn't it? And thinking about learning too. So what I've also popped on here for you after this session for you to have a look when you get the slides are some useful links. So please do explore further, which ties in with some of the things that I've mentioned tonight, including this fantastic app wheel, which is put together by our friends in Call Scotland. So fantastic work. Some of them are free, some of them are literally super cheap. If you know you've got a kid who loves technology, there's some fantastic apps out there as well. Okay, so that will bring me to the end of the session. It just leaves me to say a huge thank you. I know we're going to take some questions. I've popped on BDA helpline address here as well. I know it was mentioned at the beginning of the session and Claudia referred to my colleagues in that department. Please do keep in touch. If you are thinking about how to inspire some of the things that we've looked at this evening, helpline have got lots of great ideas. Similarly, we do in BDA training as well. Maybe we've give you a taste of maybe it's time to get some training. We train parents and teachers and so on. We have Saturday schools and lots going on, but we also have lots of free resources as well. So I can't stress enough, please do keep in touch with us. Okay, so I will stop talking now and I will hand back over to Claudia in case we've got some questions.
We do. Thanks, Donna. That was amazing. We've had some amazing feedback. Everybody's loving the inspiration. So we've really, really had a thank you, Donna, very informative webinar. So we got all of these coming in, but we do have some questions.
Fantastic.
So the first one I've got for you is, hi, and thank you for this talk. Great inspiration. I am 37 dyslexic mum and my 5-year-old is struggling with processing sounds. Do you have any tips on how we should handle it now? I didn't get a test until I failed and was 8 years old and got extra help then.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claudia, for sharing that. And thanks, everyone, for that lovely feedback. Okay, so thank you for being so brave to share about yourself and actually talking about what we've looked at tonight. As a parent, it's going to be, you will be your child's best role model there. And that's really important. So any of the obstacles that they may have coming up, and obviously they're young at the moment, you will be with them every step of the way. I know you are. And obviously Helpline is there to support you as an adult, but also your child. So you talked about processing sounds. So I think multisensory is a great way to go. And that's basically something to look at, listen to, and something very active as well. Okay, we know that that's a great way to learn anything, and specifically sound. So phonics, so the advocate of the ABC, playing around with pictures, sounds, making games out of that. As we know, school will do some of those things. But as I've said a lot this evening, as parents, we have more time. I know we don't always feel like we have a lot of time, but we have more time to do some of those things at home. And so that's my key message, is really make it multi-sensory. So don't be scared to get creative with it. Take what school are sending home and what your child is working on and play around with it. You will have your own superpowers as well as having dyslexia. So think outside the box, tap into some of them as well. If you want specific guidelines in terms of how to support phonics, there is a free e-learning module on BDA website. So if you go onto our training pages on the BDA website page, and I've got the link here, and you just Google British Dyslexia Association, it will take you there. Then you will see that in our training pages, there is a module there that helps you as well look at phonics. Beyond that, do have a look at the resources on our website, or drop us an email and we can share some more specific information. But if I scoot back, if that's okay, everyone, to this slide, I didn't refer to it, I just said there's some resources here, but actually have a look on BDA YouTube channel. There's some great little videos there that can help you as a parent. Similarly, our friends over at Helen Arkell, there's some great dyslexia teaching videos there where somebody's sitting with a child at home showing them how to do phonics and so on. So I think you might get some inspiration there as well. Okay, but make it multi-sensory, and yeah, come back to us if you want some more information as well, and have a look at that free module that we've got on the BDA website in the e-learning section of our training pages as well.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much. We have another question. My daughter has just been diagnosed with dyslexia. She's 8 years old and currently feels less able than all her school friends. Would you advise that we tell her she has dyslexia? We are concerned it will make her feel more different than she currently does.
Wow, that is a great question. I think only you can decide as a parent if that is going to be appropriate. I can understand why you may not want to use that label. I think in terms of your own judgment with her, I suspect at some point in her life she will know. So that conversation is going to happen. And it's up to you, I guess, as a parent. You know her best in terms of, is she at the right time in her life to be okay about that word dyslexia, really, which can, even for adults, it unlocks a lot of emotional fallout, really. I think if you think it's probably not a great time to talk about it, it's talking about what her superpowers are in preparation for conversations to come, really. So everything we've looked at tonight, feeling good about yourself, the superpowers, you can talk about all of those things without using the word dyslexia. And then eventually, if she is ready to talk about that, and you guys as a family feel she's there, then you can talk about dyslexia and say, actually, all the things that we know you're fantastic at, it's actually, we think it's because you have dyslexia, or however you want to phrase that as her family, okay? So in terms of is it a good time, that's entirely up to you guys. But I would focus on all her gifts and talents. You know, we hear this story a lot about kids not feeling great about themselves. Again, part of it is due to COVID, and for some kids, it's going to be really hard to catch up now for a variety of reasons. We know dyslexia is one. That's why it's more important than ever. It really is, that we make sure that we inspire and support our kids to feel good about themselves. But again, if there's an emotional issue there, and it sounds like there might be, and you're concerned as a parent, I've popped up on this slide again, please do reach out to us at Helpline. We are always ready to help, and we're always listening, so happy to support. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I hope it helps in some way.
We have time for a couple more questions. I'm a specialist teacher in a secondary school. I was really interested in the idea of the learning journal. Do you think spending some time in one-to-one sessions creating learning journals would be valuable? I'm thinking that if they are taught the strategy at KS3, it might help with revision technique at KS4.
Yes, definitely. And again, another great question. So we know with our older learners, so teenagers and beyond into adulthood, one of the things that really helps if they're studying and even in the workplace is keeping this thread through. And actually, as I said earlier, what we hear a lot is from those with dyslexia is please don't presume anything about me. And what we often tend to do, especially when we're working with older learners, isn't it? And my background's in teaching as well, is that we presume, okay, because this learner is this age, they are going to understand how to manage their time, how to learn, how to revise, how to have organisational skills. Now, we know some of those things will have gone rusty anyway because of COVID. And for some of our learners, they've never really been that great, even pre-COVID. So yes, if you can spend time, and it doesn't have to be, you know, a journal, it's however you want to kind of use with youngsters. Technology can, you know, step in. You could do something as a Word document or as a mind map, however it's going to work for you. It doesn't have to be kind of a diary as such. But yes, if you can teach that, it really helps. We know it helps with older learners and adults because it helps this thread. And actually, by having conversations of, okay, in your last, I don't know, math session, what was the bit where, what were your takeaways? What was the takeaway for you? And getting somebody to think, ready to put it down in a journal or however they're going to show it in a mind map or whatever, actually gets them to use metacognitive skills as well. So yes, I really think it's a great skill if you've got time to teach it, and also will stand them in great stead for future learning as well. It's just a great habit to get into. And if you want to find out a bit more, you know, come back to us and ask, and also let me know how you're getting on with it as well. I'd love to hear more if you do it, and let us know how you get on with it as well, so keep in touch.
Great. So one more question, if you
Yep.
don't mind, Donna. So we've got, thank you, Donna. I've learned so much. My son really struggles at school and does not enjoy English whatsoever. We have been focusing at home so much on giving him a head start in his English lessons, which he does not enjoy. Would you recommend we continue or give him the time and space away from something he finds so difficult?
Wow, another tricky question, but a very interesting one. Again, it's not for us to tell you guys as parents what to do or not to do. What I can share, however, is when we speak to adults with dyslexia, and say, you know, what did your family do to help you in childhood? And they will often say, my parent remained a parent and not a teacher. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because of COVID, we us parents have been forced into being teachers. But actually, we know that when we talk to adults who've been all the way through it, they will say, my mum stayed my mum. And when I was at home, I was able to be myself, do the things I enjoyed, even if it was nothing to do with school and so on. So, me as a parent, answering that question to you, I think I probably would leave it now. But I understand if you're really worried and think, I can't leave it because we're worried about his literacy. So I guess it's just getting the balance right. But, you know, you'll know him better than anybody else. And if, you know, he starts to really, lose energy and he's disengaging, it's time to stop. And I guess as parents, it's not beating yourself up and thinking, oh, we've got to keep pushing, we've got to do right by him. It's actually understanding that if you focus on other things, some of the things that we talked about tonight, which is nothing really to do with the curriculum in that way, in some ways you may be supporting him even more than sitting down and making him do some of his English work as well. Okay, so it's a tricky one, and this is the ongoing dilemma that we have as parents, isn't it? We desperately want the best for our kids academically, but we also want to be great parents and make sure that we're not putting too much pressure on. And COVID has blurred the lines between those things. So again, if you want to come back and share more and want to ask us more, please do reach out to us. We are here to help. But if it were me, I feel like maybe I'd pull away a little bit now, because I think once we've sometimes found with our kids with dyslexia, there's almost overload, and there's a switch off point where they just kind of stop learning despite our best efforts to keep trying to engage them in that way.
Perfect.
So
thank you, Donna.
that's okay,
We
Claudia.
had a lot of questions which we couldn't get through them all. But you can contact us. We do have the helpline, as Donna's put on her last slide. We had amazing comments about what you spoke about, lots of inspiration. So I think this is of all the time we have this evening. So just a reminder to everyone to keep an eye on our website and social media so we can continue providing you with help and support. Just leaves me to say a big thank you to Donna, who's been amazing, and to everyone for joining us tonight. Stay safe and take care.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Claudia. Bye
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.